book that we are going to be reading for today, start reading for today, is this very important book here. Drug cartels do not exist. Narco trafficking and culture in the United States and Mexico. I also invited a friend of mine, also fellow Mexican, Gila, if she would like to join in and to, make sure that all of this stuff was recounted in the, in a way that was satisfactory. So, I forgot how to, oh, there we go. Can everybody see the text okay? At least can you read it so far? Okay, so we're gonna pass through all of this, but this is an important quote here, right? I don't believe, oh my goodness. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, Omega Star, for your resubscription, and I cannot believe it has been an entire year. That is amazing. Then thank you so much for joining this reading group. Hello, Squishmallow Dragon. It's good to see you. So, like I said, I'm trying to do the Brooks thing of there's some issues with Discord. Yeah, you can watch on Twitch, no worries. That's why I wanted to give people options. Okay, so let's start with the introduction. Right. As we always should. Just give me one quick second. Trying to make sure I have to multitask. Something I'm not good at, okay? So, the invention of a formidable enemy. On February 19th, 2012. Oh, thank you so much, Philip. Just be careful on the on the usage of emotes. For some reason, it's doing that again. But anyway, and thank you so much on Twitch as well. So again, lots of stuff. Oh my goodness, yes, it's good to see you. Posted on Discord unless I was live. Yes, I am live. So, on February 19th, 2012, then Presidente Felipe Calderón of the PAN Party, Partido Acción Nacional, the Party of National Action, gave his final speech while in power on the anniversary of the celebration of the founding of the Mexican Army and Air Force. Something extraordinary happened that day that Luis Astorga, who is still to this day very, very, I don't know, definitely with those of us who have to deal with like sociological, historical studies, type things like that, this is a name that pops up quite a lot. He is a sociologist and an expert in drug trafficking and security issues. And so he noted a group of soldiers acted out a procedure for checking a car for drugs, right? I believe it is 3, Philip. So he writes, in a vehicle where marijuana was presumably concealed, the soldier who played the trafficker was dressed according to his archetypical image, an image that is shown even in the National Defense Secretariat, or as we would say it in Mexico, Sedena, museum, dedicated to drug trafficking. Cowboy boots and a sombrero, listening to narco corridos. The scene made Calderón and his wife Margarita Zavala and the secretaries of National Defense and Navy, General Guillermo Galvan and Admiral Francisco Sainz, burst into laughter. Why do you already hate this so much? The acting thing is so stinky. Yeah, no, for real. Yeah. The military carried out a performance of their activities against drug trafficking, embodying the figure of the trafficker that... Thank you so very much, Buffy Geek. It is... Oh, wow, we have a hype train going. Thank you so very much, everybody. All of you on Twitch. I appreciate it. Woo! We actually did end up getting a hype train. Let's go. So, a hype train when reading about how drug cartels don't exist, eh? So, drug ballads, right? Narco corridos. That image, as Astorga points out, has been built into Sedena's Museo del Enervante, right? So there is a museum of drugs in Mexico. You know, have you ever been to it, Gila, by any chance? I don't know. I've never associated cowboy boots with drug trafficking. Well, the thing is that it's not the way how Americans associate themselves with that, right? It's how people associate Mexican cartel figures, right? Like they see them as being, right? So, but yeah, I don't know if you've ever been there. I've been told it's interesting, but it's not really my, I don't know. In this museum, popularly known as the Narco Museum, a mannequin is dressed like that same narco that the military put on display that day, a rancher, vulgarly flaunting his sudden wealth generated by drug trafficking in the form of the unavoidable Versace shirt, crocodile skin boots, and the ever-present sombrero, without which his image would not be recognizable. And thank you so very much, Squishmallow, and hello, Philippe. Thank you so very much for the hype train. To keep going, let's go. In Mexico, do people think of drug when they see someone in cowboy boots? Well, that's what he's trying to get into here, right? So the museum even adds objects to strengthen the legendary narco. By the this is how Europeans think of Middle Eastern ones, with the Versace, always Versace. I mean, what does that tell you about Versace, though? That it lends itself to this. It wants to be associated with that, right? Because it's like, well, now I can always have a market, right, of the people that want to dress like that, right? I see Apples is typing. So, without this image, right, the museum even adds objects to strengthen the legendary Mexican narco character. Gold-plated, diamond-encrusted weapons with the drug lord's engraved initials. Right? I read the first chapter of the book and listened to a few interviews with the author today. Very good book. Thank you for recommending me. Intriguing to hear the author reference Gary Webb and Peter Dale Scott. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Is Versace on the BDS list? I mean, I don't... Probably. I don't know. But again, the whole point being that... Thank you so much, Omega Star, for the 100 bits. They are so very much appreciated. So this mannequin, right, that we see here is that it is something that was invented, right? It is invented, but yet this is what people think, right, when they watch the show Narcos. And so just having read a little bit into this book right now, sort of giving you this sort of vision of what a narco trafficker supposedly looks like. Does that concord with how people think of drug traffickers from Mexico in particular? Like, is that how they are imagined to be in the American consciousness? And I just posed this question to all chats and obviously people on Discord, and feel free to unmute if you feel comfortable, or to type in chat. Both of them are more than welcome. Are your super chats off? I don't have super chats. You have to have over 500. Don't you have to have over 500? I know that you can go to Stream Elements and do that, but anyway. This military performance gives us a rare glimpse into how the Mexican political system has created a formidable enemy in these times of permanent national security crisis. The narco imagined by the military is, in theory, the opposite. No. It's supposed to... It starts now. I think it's 500. Because even Brooks said, like, usually noon his time, which I think is mountain time, is when he does Anti-Oedipus, and because Discord was acting weird, it said it was an empty slot, so I started mine at this slot. So it's the opposite of a soldier, right? Oh, good. We have Alexander Dugin in chat. Привет, товарищи. Oh no. I know it says that for the next weeks, but that's because I'm gonna change the schedule. Yeah. Because Brooks's time is noon. I just was trying to like change it, but then the thing was gonna start. So, quick note: this was written about a speech before the military started openly defecting to work for the narcos full time. That's true. That is true. But yeah, this is going to be moved to Friday. It's just today because of a mix-up with Discord and stuff. So don't worry about it. It'll be fixed. Undisciplined, vulgar, ignorant, and violent. Which is also, again, how generally people like to perceive when we were talking about this on stream just the other day, right? The mythology also of the, of the immigrant, right? That's another thing. For the army, however, the narco requires, if not a uniformity that distinguishes the soldiers from the narcos whom, in the name of the government, the soldier must eliminate, right? So they create, right, this idea of what it is that this constellation of things, right, that makes a narco trafficker be a narco trafficker, right? Like, how do you identify them, so to speak, right? One, of course, they talk about the Versace shirt, the crocodile skin boots, right? The, the belts, right? And I'm forgetting the name of the material that they make them out of. I mean, they're leather, but it's like the design, I forget what it's called. Like with the big buckle and everything, right? The whole thing is that they want to show off their newly acquired wealth, right? That's what they want to show off, right? Because the whole point is that, they didn't grow up in money. They're not old money. They're not the grand bourgeoisie, right? They are petit bourgeoisie that only recently got into money, that were just, a month ago peasants, essentially, right? So, Astorga observes that the archetypical clothing of the narco coincides with many of the inhabitants of rural Mexico. How does the military manage to distinguish criminals among the country's ranchers? During President Calderon's war against the narco, according to official data, around 121,683 people were murdered. So this is between 2006 to 2012. But if the narco staged by the military provoked the laughter of the president, his wife, and the defense of Navy secretaries, it was due to the caricature of the phenomenon, with obvious similarities to Narcos in movies or television series. In reality, the average appearance of both victimizers and victims of the alleged war is radically different. A November 2012 study conducted by the independent think tank Mexico Evalúa, which I do remember at one point, I think you had mentioned something about Mexico Evalúa, Gila, but I don't remember what exactly it was. If it was like you just telling me about something that they said or something about them, but showed that the recurring profile of victims of intentional homicide during the Calderón administration was that of single, poor men between 25 and 29, with little or no formal education. I'm undisciplined but not vulgar or violent. But again, this is an image that is imposed upon them. Oh, cool! I got a really cute little emote. Choo choo. Spilling the tea. Yeah, exactly. I don't like how Americans conflate the cartels with people suffering under them. They look and speak the same to me, bro. They're over there not speaking American. They're speaking Mexican. I think Mexico Evalúa just sounds like Ceneval, and most people want to disappear. Oh, okay. Makes sense. So, again, the actual profile here, right, of the victims of intentional homicide are single poor men between 25 and 29 with little or no formal education, right? Far from being ranchers or cowboys, right? So again, it goes back to that image, that mythology, right? The mythos of the narco is one of them being rancheros, of them being vaqueros, of them being tied to the rural parts of Mexico, right? That's why they like the story of El Chapo, right? Because, oh, he's from a little, he's from a little town, over there, and now he's the big boss in Culiacan and blah, 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 right? Which is a big city. Far from being ranchers or cowboys, they resided in cities such as Ciudad Juárez, Monterrey, or my hometown, Tijuana. That is the town I grew up in. The usual perpetrator during the alleged clashes between cartels did not resemble the narco played by the soldiers. It wasn't the country drug trafficker who killed his enemy in cowboy boots and a 10-gallon hat while listening to Los Tigres del Norte as the soundtrack to a low-budget film directed by the Almada brothers. Instead, with that yellowish, brownish tone, right, that they make, anything set in Mexico, look. Instead, we see that that same poor, uneducated man living a criminal lifestyle in the country's northern cities with one major difference. He is often 5 years younger than his victims. So if his victims are single poor men between the ages of 25 and 29, that means that he is between the ages of 20 and 24. Right? That is who the narco actually is, right? Quote unquote, right? So it's not these rural types that they always try to showcase, right? Of, how exorbitant they are in their wealth, etc., blah, blah, blah. No, it's poor kids that live in the cities that themselves have become more violent because of the drug war. In fact, Mexico's crime rate had been dropping precipitously in the lead up to the 2006 starting of the war on narcos. It was afterwards that then you had it blow up to, in some cases, 1,000%. I'm not even joking. That's something that we will get to in a minute in this book. It literally went up 1,000%. Wherever the armed forces of the state of Mexico go to, suddenly the violence goes up. And in one case, it went up 1,000%. So, again, and this includes also this includes also drug trafficking isn't like it used to be. The tenured good jobs aren't gone. It's all adjuncts and temps. I mean, it's funny that you say that, Philippe, but that is kind of true, right? Like in a sense that, like, at least in one way, the people that actually are, um, are actually caught and everything, right? They are like the lowest part of the rung of everything, right? So, in a sense, yes, right, the most precarious. Um, so, before Calderon, is it being recorded? My Discord froze at juicy parts like the crime resistance. It is being recorded. But if people feel uncomfortable, I can stop the recording. Again, if people don't want me to record and to stream it, I can do so, no problem. I just wanted to have like people that couldn't otherwise, join us in the Discord be able to with Twitch and YouTube. But again, I will defer to you all. If you want me to turn off the stream, I will, if you would prefer that. No, keep recording, it's fine. Okay, yeah. So, before Calderon, the military simultaneously... Oh, by the way, your team... Oh, is it? Oh, I see now. Yeah, good point. Good point. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, it's hard to multitask sometimes. Before Calderon, the military simultaneously played the role of the hero and the violent enemy of the state and civil society. They had to play both roles because behind the curtains they didn't exist as they were represented. Where does the recurring narco archetype come from then? To answer that question, we need to go back in time. Okay. In 1989, just at the end of the Cold War, political scientist Walter Morales wrote an article that is fundamental to understanding the New World Order after the fall of the Berlin Wall. The War on Drugs, a new U.S. national security doctrine. Right? For half a century, anti-communism occupied the center of U.S. national security policy. The National Security Act, enacted in 1947, was the mechanism by which the United States Congress gave legal status to the global strategy that polarized the world after World War II. Oh, no, it just, yes, hello. It's good to see everyone. During that year, two key institutions were founded in the new security era were founded, In the United States, the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, and in Mexico, the Federal Security Directorate, or el DFS. Well, I guess we'll get into it a little bit more. And also, feel free to chime in, ask questions, unmute if you'd like to, or you could type it in chat, please do. The Cold War, of course, directly involved Mexico. Over the next 3 decades, both agencies joined in efforts to contain the alleged communist threat in the hemisphere. Their collaboration deepened as the U.S. government deployed Operation Condor, an aggressive interventionist policy on the continent during the mid-1970s. A separate Operation Condor, however, was designed solely for Mexico. So, when people, if they do know about Operation Condor, right, it's usually because they know about it vis-a-vis Argentina, right, and Chile, right? Those are usually the two examples that they think of. Sometimes maybe Brazil. But it was all of Latin America, right? And Mexico, just the only thing about Mexico that was different, at least, from the get-go, is that we already had a right-wing dictatorship. They didn't have to install one. We already had one. So it was just doing more right-wing stuff, essentially, right? And Mario Vargas Llosa, who I see he was typing. Oh no, I want people to see. And please, again, like I said, if you have any comments, questions, anything, please feel free to unmute or to type out in chat. It's all good. But in essence, what this is, it's important to keep in mind that when we talk about Operation Condor and what it did in Latin America, right, it wasn't only the southern cone, as most people tend to sort of think about it. It involved Mexico as well. But like I said, the difference is that we already had a right-wing dictatorship under the PRI party. In fact, once in a book, and I've mentioned this before, in the United States, where they describe different government structures, right? And so it talked about China, the Soviet Union, India, blah, blah, blah. And then when it came to Mexico, it said a one-party democracy, right? Because it was on the American side of the ledger, right? So it was a one-party democracy. Well, I mean, and of course, America is a two-party one, so that makes it somehow more democratic. But anyway, I'm just joking, of course. Something funny about this fiction is that currently we've gone in Mexico from, quote, the president says there are no drug labs in Mexico, end quote, to, quote, we've dismantled 400 drug labs in the last 6 months, end quote, with steps in between, or any admission that the previous president was either wrong or lying. Well, yeah, of course. Whoever gets to sit in the eagle throne, right, gets to enjoy a lot of impunity. Operation Condor was basically the same as Operation Gladio, but for Latin America. I mean, that's a very interesting comparison. I'm sure that you could make that comparison to some extent, for sure. A separate Operation Condor, as I said, was designed solely for Mexico, keeping the same name but with a different focus on drug trafficking and not the fight against communism, right? Because again, you already have a right-wing dictatorship. There is no communist threat because every election that Mexicans go to, you can only vote for one party, right? And you already know who's going to win. The way how it always worked was whoever was the Secretaría de Gobernación, right? Whoever was like the Secretary of State in Mexico, they were the next person that was going to be president. Like it always functioned like that. Like, oh, whoever got this job was going to then be next up for the presidency. So, thousands of soldiers and federal police officers who destroyed drug plantations between 1975 and 1987, when it officially ended, that is to say, Operation Condor, also produced the mass displacement of peasants, drug producers, and drug traffickers. By the end of the 1970s, the Mexican drug trade not only continued to exist, but moved its center of operations to the city of Guadalajara and proceeded to dominate the international trade by charging Colombian organizations up to 50% of profits on cocaine that went through Mexico. Now, why is it important that they bring up Guadalajara, right? Because in 1965 is when the first drug cartel, right, and I'm keeping it in quotes, to keep in sync with the book, was founded, the Guadalajara cartel, in 1965. And it is from that every other one of these supposed groups, right, has sort of based itself off of. And even now, the most, what is often seen as the most dangerous of the drug cartels in Mexico is Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, or the new generation Jalisco cartel, which its base is where? Guadalajara, right? So, the most feared traffickers of that time, Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, Ernesto Doneto Fonseca Carrillo, and Rafael Caro Quintero, took on mythical status, and this wording is very important. Was the Secretary of State in charge of elections, or are they in each? No, in Mexico we have the INE, the National Electoral Institute, which recently has, I mean, Gila knows, like, it's been very weird with elections and everything in Mexico recently. Felix Gallardo, for example, who had been a Sinaloa judicial police officer and until the mid-1980s lived in the public eye, often seen with well-known politicians, right? So again, they were public. They were not these like, oh, clandestine, whatever, right? It was very, very different at that point. Catching onto the term U.S. officials used to describe the organizations headed by these larger-than-life characters, Mexican media also started to use the word cartel. So, the Americans, the United States, right, saw figures like Felix Gallardo, right, because he lived in the public eye and was known, was essentially, kind of like, if you want to think about like the Sopranos, I guess that's one way of thinking of it, right, of, knowing different, important, movers and shakers when it comes to government. I'm not saying that that is a direct comparison, but sometimes it helps to reference it like that, right? Then that's when the United States began to call them cartels, right? Oh, it's this cartel, or it's that cartel. But the word cartel, like practically all vocabulary associated with the narco, has an official origin. So again, we're going back to the mythologies that are being created here. Luis Astorga emphasizes the contradiction in referring to drug trafficking groups as cartels because, as according to official intelligence, far from collaborating to enhance their profits, the cartels act as rivals who are willing to eliminate each other, right? So, what does this mean? What does this mean? If you've ever read Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, right? And I will presume everybody here has and took very, very good notes. They will remember that Lenin talks about cartels, right? Particular cartels of particular industries, right? That they buy out all of the competition. You definitely did not do that book. You're fine. It's not well said. I'm not sure I trust Scheinbaum to improve this all that much. No, and Gila would agree with you as well. Damn, America got to the Mexican media. Exactly. I call the Sacklers of Purdue a cartel, right? But see, the difference is Big Pharma is a cartel, right? Because they work with one another, right, to get profits. Drug cartels are not cartels because they don't work with one another, right? That's the big difference, right? Like OPEC is a cartel. It is described as a cartel, right? But what is it? It is the organization of petroleum producing states, right? That is why it is a cartel, because they work in a common interest, right? Well, yeah, cartels are not cartels, right? But only when it comes to drug cartels, right? Because again, it's making them seem as though they work with one another, and they don't. Right? It makes them seem as though they have a hierarchy. They have a full defined, right, aspect to them, but they don't. Whereas cartels under capitalism, right, like Big Pharma, right, the military industrial complex, right, like, I mean, there are all these terms for it, right? But those are cartels because they work together, right, to try to continue reaping super profits from the imperialized world in particular, but also to drug cartels are only cartels in name only, right? That is to say, they were officially called cartels, right? They were called cartels by the Americans, but then we will see how it goes not just from a misnomer, right, or being in name only, but then the logic of that, right, begins to essentially sort of take on a life of its own, right? Yeah, big oil, big tobacco, exactly. So that's yeah, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, right? Exactly, and that is a cartel behind the kafala system of slave labor in the Middle East. Yeah, no, it's horrific. It's horrific. But it's the one that, after, it's the one that, you've probably seen video clips or pictures of when OPEC, in response to stuff Israel did, as it's always doing, decided to shut, essentially, do a full stoppage of of oil. Looking at you, Qatar, yeah, for sure, Qatar, and at least two of the United Arab Emirates, at least. Thank you for the read. I'm gonna head out to get groceries. Yeah. The big other thing is like how much my rich graduating roommate's parents just have to swing by Medellin because their history after traveling to the U.S. without really understanding English and zero Spanish. It's also ironically helps to distract people who would otherwise be rightfully terrified of big pharma, big agriculture, the the prison industrial complex by painting only drug cartels as bad cartel synergy. Exactly, Hila, exactly. So, in his book El Siglo de las Drogas, Astorga, which it's one of the books I'm gonna have to read at some point. Right now, I think the book I have on my throne is, it's the Palestine Laboratory. It's that I need that one too, because Border Optics and this also. There is a link. There is a very great link that I'm trying to argue between all of this and also the state of Israel vis-a-vis Palestinians, and anyway. But regardless, in a 1994 interview between Time Magazine and Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela, the Colombian trafficker who allegedly led "It's only a matter of time that you do another PhD." I mean, like, I kid you not, like, when I was a graduate student, I took so many extra credits that I probably already qualify for another one. The Gulf state slave system is run by the same people backing the genocide in Sudan, and the ones that also were backing the genocide in Yemen, right? That caused the Houthis to grow as an organization, right? Because the people they went against were the people that are Shia in northern Yemen. And his brother Miguel, the trafficker, states that the Cali cartel simply does not exist. Quote, "It's an invention of the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration. There are many groups, not just one cartel. The police and the DEA know, but they prefer to invent a monolithic enemy." Right? Think about how this also coincides with something like now, right? Now that we have like terms like narco-terrorist, right? Or an invasion, or like all of these things, right? Or the illegals, right? Like, it's always to create a monolithic enemy, right? That then has to be completely eliminated. That is a huge problem, as you can see, right, when it comes to the usage of this language. Actually, no, there actually is another book by Oswaldo Zavala on my throne, but that's a whole different story. Sorry, and also feel free to keep writing your comments. The British journalist Joan Grillo was given the same response in Colombia when interviewing the quote-unquote narco attorney Gustavo Salazar, the legal representative of the alleged Medellin cartel. The lawyer repeated what Rodrigo Orejuela did. So what's important here is that although he says he repeated, what he's saying is that they both came to the conclusion, like they both were saying the same thing, right? Even though they were of two rival cartels, right? Like, so to speak, quote unquote, right? Like they had every reason to say that there was a thing, but they didn't, right? So I want to stress that. Quote, cartels do not exist. What you have is a collection of drug traffickers. Sometimes they work together and sometimes they don't. American prosecutors just call them cartels to make it easier to make their cases. It's all part of the game, end quote. Now, some people might be skeptical of this because, oh, of course, he's a narco attorney. Of course, he's going to say this. But again, there is the fact that when we actually look at the evidence, we do see just this. It is as deorganized as, that is to say, it is as decentralized as can be, right? That is the problem. Like, a cartel requires centralization. The centralization is always imposed from without, right? It's always done by particularly the media, right? It says, oh, this person is the capo, no, not capo. Well, yeah, because they use that in Italian, or which just means head. This person is the, whatever, blah, 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 right? They always want to, the Don or whatever, the Godfather, blah, blah, blah. Like, they like using that language, right? But it doesn't actually work that way, right? The title of this book comes partly from these statements, but above all, from a critical reflection of the official language that insists on mythology when discussing organized crime. The cartels do not exist. That is the early lesson learned by the drug traffickers themselves. There is a market for illegal drugs and people who are willing to work in that market, but there is no such division that Mexican and U.S. authorities try to use to try and separate these groups from civil society and government structures. Trafficking organizations may generate violence, but, as I will argue through these pages, this violence is more a symptom of state policing strategies than criminal actions of the narcos themselves. Oh, okay, interesting. And I'll wait to see what Gila has to say. And Wolzian. This reminds me of the book, quote, or The Dawn of Everything, and how the 18th century, quote-unquote, philosophers literally invented cities ruled by kings and emperors because they couldn't otherwise conceive of cities rising on their own. I mean, yeah. Before I became an before I was an academic, do you think that narco corridos lead to that further method? Yes. Like, and it's funny too because he does go into this, right? He does go into the whole narco corrido thing, but it's like that actually, like the fact that the government is thinking about like the Bible does that with Cain and the Mexican government, like whenever it says, oh, we want to restrict narco corridos or whatever, it's like you have a whole bunch of cultural capital, right, and a whole bunch of money that has been spent in Mexico because people want to go see, right, this and this and this and this, whatever. Oh, Chalino Sanchez's house or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, all of that stuff, right? Another thing, too, is like by saying, oh, we're going to outlaw it, does that actually do anything for those who are harmed by it, right? No. all it does is create even more of a demand for those things, which actually is in the government's benefit. That's the issue, right? And that goes back to what Gila said, right? That it's synergy. It's very synergetic when it comes to these things. Oh, okay. Max Blumenthal. Haven't heard that name in a while. I read a little further into the book. There's stuff written about narco corridos and cultural products. Yeah, there is. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, we will get there. So, I mean, this is the introduction. So, before I was an academic and essayist, I was a reporter. My research is the product of a long intellectual journey that began in the 1990s while writing for El Diario de Juárez, one of the most well-known newspapers in northern Mexico. One thing I just want to add here. In Mexico, print culture still is a thing. Like, people still buy newspapers, right? Because they're still affordable, right? That's one of the things. Like, for what essentially more or less would cost like 50 cents, you can get a newspaper, right? It hasn't become like what the United States has, where you have like very, like the New York Times or whatever. They're super expensive, right? So a lot of people still actually do get their news from newspapers. So it's important to keep that in mind too. There, I had the good fortune of completing my professional education under the mentorship of the investigative reporter Ignacio Alvarado and the photojournalist Julian Cardona. For decades, long before I even dreamt of this book, these two journalists began a powerful decentering of narco news coverage. For both, the cartels are a symbolic device whose main function is to hide the real networks of official power that determined the flow of drug trafficking. Right? This idea that everything about the border and all of this stuff, and that Mexico and the United States, yada yada yada, it's like the amount of drugs that are taken to the United States would not be possible if the US government was not actively part of the whole system, right? Same thing with all of the other governments, right? Like, that's their thing, right? That's their whole thing. So their work was and continues to be revolutionary and has had a profound impact on a new generation of Mexican and foreign journalists and academics who have built on their contributions. One other note I want to just add. Mexico, and I don't think this has changed anytime recently, is still known as the most dangerous place to be a journalist. From what I, like, for years, it's been at the top of the, whatever that really means, I don't know, but, yeah. Because, yeah. The remarkable work of Alvarado and Cardona has been indispensable throughout my career as a journalist and academic. Thanks to their critical insight, I have been able to develop the central ideas of this book, ideas that I have corroborated over 5 years of research with other sources that have separately reached similar conclusions. Technically, Mexico is the most dangerous place in the world to be a journalist outside of active war zones. Yeah, I mean, that's like what they used to say about Tijuana. Tijuana is the most dangerous place in the world outside of an active war zone. I mean, well, it was an active war zone, so, essentially. So, another one of the fundamental sources of my research has been, as I have mentioned, the crucial work of the Mexican sociologist Luis Astorga. His early book, Mitología del Narcotraficante en México, Mythology of the Drug Trafficker in Mexico, Astorga first observed, the symbolic construction of what we think we know about drug trafficking. Okay, this is what's important. The mythology that's built around the narco, right, and therefore even right, like all of the other attributes that then also come to the U.S. side of the border, right? The way how these cartels, quote unquote, work, right, is based on what people think they know about how drug trafficking works. According to him, the drug trafficker is a myth based on a matrix of language whose rules and meaning have been determined by the state, what we call the narco. This matrix does not explain the actual activities of traffickers, but symbolically codifies the epistemological limits with which we involuntarily represent traffickers and the drug trade, right? And this is what he's arguing, right? Astorga explains, the distance between the real drug traffickers and their world, and the symbolic construction that we used to speak about them is so great that there seems to be no other current and feasible way than to refer to this subject in a mythological way, whose antipodes are represented by legal code and drug ballads, right? So it's like you can only be defined, right, legally by saying this is what drug trafficking is according to the law, and then you have the narratives that are then being created, right, with narco corridos, right, which both of them enhance, right, what is actually ongoing, right, what is actually happening, right. The importance of Astorga's conclusion cannot be overstated. We know little to nothing about the phenomenon, I should say, of drug trafficking, since their social space and the public sphere have been separated by a dense structure of meaning that has been conceived for the political purposes of concealment and non-understanding. But if, on the contrary, our impression is that we know all too well the life and death of the narcos, their family relationships, their uncontrolled ambition, their psychopathic violence, it is because for decades we have been accustomed to that system of official representation that contradictorily reveals the cartel flowchart, but is clearly unable to stop them. Does anybody have any questions or anything they'd like to add right now? A funny consequence is that the fastest growing religion in Mexico is the cult to La Santa Muerte, which features dead narcos as saints, right? I mean, and there already was what's his name, Malverde, right? Like, you know, like, I mean, I've seen it, like when I was in Chihuahua and in you know, like states like that where they had like little shrines, yeah, for Malverde. Right, and people sell, like, you know, like his little stack, you know, like the ones that I have over here, like of the Virgen de Guadalupe, etc. But they make them of quote unquote narcos, right? That have been martyred and are now sainted. Now, it must be emphasized that this matrix of narco discourse had its origin in a complex binational relationship between Mexico and the United States, as Waltrode Morales recalls. When U.S. anti-drug policy replaced communism as the new doctrine of national security, the U.S. public was already prepared to confirm the invasion of the drug cartels. Note, this book was not written within the past few months that Trump has been in power, right? But this idea of an invasion by way of drug cartels, etc., that was even a thing back in the 1988, right? So that's the thing. Like, people say, oh, Trump is the person who brought all of this stuff to the fore. No, no, no. It was already there. The issue is that people were willing to undertake it, right, and had sublimated it in many ways, and essentially felt that it was normal. Essentially, they had normalized it. Because they are empty signifiers, they are easy to fill with nonsense without anyone arguing, but that doesn't make any sense. Exactly, right? Because another thing, too, is, like, that's why a lot of the shows love to focus on their personal lives, right? Because then, oh, well, he's just this country boy, right? That all he wanted to do was to, like, impress this girl, right? That rejected him because he was a poor rancher and not, from the shows like Netflix, El Chapo. Yeah, exactly. And this is where the two books that I do reading groups in this server on, Border Optics and this book, right, definitely cross over, right? Because there's border valent media, right, that tries to make people sympathize. Yeah. That's another one that is spoken about. La Reina del Sur, El Chapo, right? But then also border wars, right? Like all of this stuff, these two things concord with one another, right? They are used by the state apparatus, particularly by the United States, to create narratives that say, right, oh, there is an invasion, here are these huge, intense organizations that are more powerful than entire governments, but also we have no idea how to handle them. Those two things can't be, those two things are nonsensical. Individualist focus, right? Exactly. But again, right? I have no idea what the original The Bridge series was about, but the US one with Damian Bashir was about the cartels. Oh. Again. But it's interesting, right? The cartels, right? It's interesting that they are the cartels, plural. Because again, if they all do the same thing, supposedly, they would just be a cartel, not cartels, plural, right? Like Big Pharma is a cartel, right? Even though cap whatever blah blah blah, but it that's where the language starts to you begin to see that it doesn't quite fit, right? The map and the territory do not correspond. The nebulous enemy within has a lot of similarities to anti-Semitism. Yes, I mean, this is what I was saying on Sunday, right? With the Border Optics reading, right? When they begin to say that, oh, everybody who crosses the border is illegal, well, it doesn't matter that, like I was once asked, are you a regular illegal or an illegal, right? Whatever that even means. But what's important is that Mexicanness and illegality were already two concepts that were interchangeable, right? They were one was within the other, right? And that's how they saw, so to speak, all Mexicans. That they were, oh, they're all illegal to some extent, right? The American version of The Bridge was set in Seattle, but looked to be filmed in Vancouver, BC. Oh, okay. But cartels is somehow always plural. Right, interesting, because in the U.S. usually do not think of Big Pharma plural. Exactly. But they're supposedly doing the same thing. Right? But then somehow they're also against one another. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Again, that's the regular illegal. I know. I don't even know what that even means. Like, what do you mean regular illegal? Okay, so this change of perception among the U.S. public was not the result of an accurate understanding of the issue of drug trafficking. On the contrary, The belief in cartels as the new national security threat was a direct effect of the implementation of a state policy based in part on the conception of a permanent enemy that allows the justifications of actions that would otherwise be illegal and immoral, right? So, we have the right to deport people without giving them due process because, they are a member of a cartel. We have the right to lie to people, like on one of my other streams that I mentioned, when they are in U.S. Marshals custody for like an hour or so, and their children are still in ICE custody, to lie and say, "Oh, unless you're willing to waive your right to asylum, you won't ever find out where your kid is," right? Again, these things that would otherwise be illegal and immoral are now justified because, the drug cartels, the invasion, the blah, 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 all of that stuff just keeps adding on to it, right? So, quote, Boy Meets Mini says, but you aren't apologizing for the cartels. No, we're explaining how they came about to begin with. Exactly. Like, trust me, as someone who lived in this, like, look, there is, if you want to know something, hello, James. Welcome in. No, my mistake. I'm thinking of the American version of The Killing. Oh, okay. I see. But, like, again, I grew up in Tijuana when the drug war started. I still get told by people today, right? Like, when you, like, back then it was worse, right? Like, like when I was a child, it was even worse, right? Like, I remember at one time I couldn't even go to school because there was like a shootout, right? Like, between the federal police and God only knows who else, right? But to think of it now, in this way, it's like, even then people were like, oh, well, of course the the government, the local, state, federal, of course they're all in on this. But also on the American side too. That's the thing. It's like America will say Mexico is doing this, but it will never say it is, even though by definition it has to be, right? If one government has it, then the other government has to have it, particularly if it's the consuming country. Quote, we have the right to make 2 to 5-year-olds represent themselves in immigration court because spending money on giving them free overworked lawyers is a waste of money. Right, that's true. And also because they've made it so that they don't grant them the right to an attorney in those cases if they are in detention centers. That is why you had that 5-year-old girl, right, who was being asked by the judge, do you know what a lawyer is? And she says no. But it doesn't matter because she has to defend herself, right? Like, I don't know how a 5-year-old is supposed to defend themselves, supposed to go into court pro se against a judge, But anyway, that's the whole thing. To make the security agenda legal, Ronald Reagan signed the National Security Decision Directive 221 in 1986, which designated the illegal drug trade as a rising threat to U.S. national security. The war on drugs, which began in the 1970s during the Nixon administration, as a domestic strategy to combat leftist dissent and exert control of racialized minorities, would now take the place of communism to legitimize U.S. intervention. Waltraud Morales' prediction, then, in her 1989 article, is still as impressive and pertinent now as it was then. The, quote, evil empire of drugs, end quote, has the potential to evoke fear of the enemy so basic and powerful in the doctrine of anti-communism. The danger, therefore, is that for one more generation of U.S. foreign policy, will be rooted in hatred of a mythical enemy in conspiracy and not democracy, and ideological doctrines instead of and ideological doctrines of national security. That is very true. That is very true. Left is dissent. Oh no, but again, like I forget if he goes into this in the introduction or in the first or in the next chapter, but he does talk about how like how the Contras, one of the ways that they were able to make money was literally by particularly at places like South Central and Compton, etc., right, by being able to sell crack, right? The United States said, well, make your money there, right? But what, that's, but yeah. A fun memory about Joe Biden is that he gave the reply to the SOTU, and he tried to go to the right of Bush Sr. when he said that, quote, the proposed war on drugs did not go far enough. You can still find the clip on C-SPAN archives. Oh my gosh. Oh, it's the State of the Union, sorry. No, I mean, oh yeah, it literally goes in right here. Anti-drug policy as a new security doctrine since the 1980s produced one of the most significant political scandals in the history of the United States. But is it taught when it comes to the history of the United States? Not really. Although some journalists had approached the subject before, the revelation was made full force with national and international fanfare by investigative journalist Gary Webb in a series of 3 articles published in the San Jose Mercury News between August 18th and 20th, 1996. Webb revealed direct links between the so-called crack cocaine epidemic in the black neighborhoods of South Central Los Angeles and the CIA-backed counterinsurgency in Nicaragua to subvert the Sandinista movement. Okay. Because cocaine is not cheap. But how did they make it cheap? How did they create this epidemic? Right? And they will go into it in a little bit. According to Webb's reporting, the CIA allowed Nicaraguan Democratic Forces, the FDN, Fuerzas Democráticas de Nicaragua, operatives, otherwise known as the Contras, to finance their guerrillas with profits obtained from the sale of crack cocaine in California. While the FDN war is barely a memory today, Black America is still dealing with its poisonous side effects. Urban neighborhoods are grappling with legions of homeless crack addicts. Thousands of young men are serving long prison sentences for selling cocaine, a drug that was virtually unobtainable in black neighborhoods before the CIA's army started bringing it into South Central in the 1980s at bargain basement prices. Because again, up until that point, the only people that could even consume cocaine, right, were rich white people, right? Those are the people that are that cocaine as such, right? Like when it comes to the various names, right? That they think of white collar, right? Like, they might even think of Patrick Bateman, etc., right? Like those types, right? But then they say, well, that is true, but what if essentially we subsidize a kind of cocaine and begin to sell it in South Central, and through that we will fund anti-communist forces in Central America? Do you think, and I'm asking this sincerely, do you think that has anything to do why people from Nicaragua to this day are still trying to make it to the United States? Why they might not feel safe? Yes, the VOD will be available. The YouTube one for sure. So, Webb's reporting profoundly damaged the credibility of the CIA's counterinsurgency operations in Central America. In my opinion, there is no credibility to anything of the CIA, but that's just me. In response, the government unleashed a brutal smear campaign against the journalists. It's almost like certain organizations that do this now. A campaign backed by the mainstream media, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Times, which preferred to privilege official sources who questioned. Someone should ask GOP OP Never Trumper Ana Navarro, who loves to boast that she still has Nicaraguan Contras on her contacts list, right? Well, hey, I mean, if she needs a dealer, she knows where to go, right? Which privileged official sources who questioned Webb rather than give credit to a colleague for the risk he took. National newspapers pettily refused to investigate, simply because Webb's work had been done for another news outlet, which is very strange. Like this whole like, oh, you didn't publish it with us. Like, that's how publishing works. You publish it somewhere, and like this onslaught ended Webb's journalistic career, and just a brief content warning because it's upcoming. When even his own newspaper retracted his reports. Finally, Webb's life ended when, unemployed and marginalized and betrayed by his colleagues, he unalived himself in 2004. So, that's it. 3 decades later, people who don't know this has happened before are yelling at the New York Times and Washington Post, quote, "Why aren't you defending Assange and each other? Don't you know that they will come for you next?" I mean, it's the same thing like when the New York Times did essentially what is an op-ed, but running it as truth, right, about the, stuff pertaining to October 7th, right, only from the Israeli side, right, which even in the Hebrew media, the family was saying, this is not true. The way people describe drug cartels has always struck me as just gross. So looking into this book has been incredible. And I sympathize with how you're putting it, Philip, because in a sense, yes, right? Like, in a way, that is how, so to speak, almost as if by proxy, if that makes sense, right? But yeah, I get what you mean. In 1998, the CIA admitted in a report from its Inspector General that the agency, quote, had only worked with 58 Contras. Only 58, guys, only 58, involved in the trafficking of cocaine. But also hid its criminal activities from Congress, end quote. So they were willing to mention 58. We only had 58 contacts, right? We only had 58, promise you. But we also lied to Congress. We also lied by omission. According to Alfred McCoy's classic study, and I also need to get this book too because it's going to come in very important as well. The Politics of Heroin, CIA Complicity in the Global Drug Trade. It's a very good book. But like I said, I need physical copies when I'm doing research. But that's just me. That same year, and if you would like to help, you can always go to my Throne, throne.com/Shakespeare, and help get sponsoring the books that are on there. I'm doing this for the streams, of course. If you would like to. Again, no one is compelled to, or don't feel bad if you can't. It's fine. Always take care of yourself first. That same year, the celebrated journalist, Charles Bowden met with Webb in Sacramento, California. Bowden stressed Webb's resolute confidence while defending the validity of his reporting when he brought up the fact that Webb's work had been discussed alongside conspiracy theories. Webb stated, quote, "I don't believe in fucking conspiracy theories. uh, I believe in fucking conspiracies, right? That's the difference. There was a conspiracy, right? There was a conspiracy, but it wasn't a fire line. Yeah, I know. That is a very fire line. That's why I like that he opens the book with it. I'm seeing that. Yeah, no, it's a very good thing because people like to say, "Well, aren't you think? Isn't that very conspiratorial?" I don't believe in fucking conspiracy theories. I believe in fucking conspiracies, though. Like for real. This book strives to build on the critical potential of the brave work of reporters like Webb. Throughout these years of research, I have found other reporters who, without the prestige of awards or lucrative international scholarships, have raised the same red flag that Webb did concerning state culpability within the supposed war on drugs. One of them is Terence E. Papa, who wrote a book fundamental to my research, Drug Lord: The Life and Death of a Mexican Kingpin. As Charles Bowden has noted, this book can be read as an instruction manual for understanding drug cartels. Reporting for the El Paso Herald-Post, Papa, sadly, when more journalists have been alive by like when schoolboy, yeah. No, I mean again, that's the reason why when I when people talk about those organizations, I'm not going to say their names, but the ones that are particularly very much on the side of a specific country in the Middle East, I call them life-ruining organizations for a reason, because that's what they try to do, right? They're not they're not just online, right? They want to exert as much, power as they can, right? To deliberately, they know what they're doing, so to speak, right? Which I never liked as a phrase, like, you know what you did. Well, of course I know what I did, because I'm the one that did it, right? But also, they know what they're doing. Sadly, when more journalists have been unalived by cartel violence in 3.5 years of AMLO than during the entire 6 years of the previous record holder, the entire online left rushed in to defend AMLO. It's true. Yes, LJ. Mm-hmm. Like the fact that the CIA well, I mean, one, it created, well, one, there are two different substances, right? There's cocaine as uh, in its particulate form, and then in its what it's often called its rock form, so crack. so they are two different ways, two different things, right? And so they were willing to allow them to sell uh, both of them, but particularly crack in black neighborhoods, particularly in SoCal. So that's, and again, it was so that then all the profits that they made would be to fight, would be there to fight communism. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, like one thing you can see is like, and I think that book that was just mentioned, The Politics of Heroin, CIA complicity in the global drug trade, would be the one I would say perhaps start with that, because that's where you do begin to see things that eventually lead to things like the opioid crisis, which now also has the fentanyl crisis, right, which disproportionately affects BIPOC. So I would recommend that. Hmm. No, it's a very interesting question. Like I definitely think that like one of the things is just to also consider the way how imperialism works in that too, precisely because like Costa Rica, if I remember correctly, is one of the few countries that like has the U.S. dollar as their national currency. So it's right. Well, right. Because then what you have is this like because what you're also describing by like these people that can go to Europe and quote unquote blend in. It's like, well, there's also the comprador bourgeoisie, right? Like the ones who are willing to, right, allow for the imperializing of their own country for, so then that way they can, they benefit from it, right? Yeah. Mm. No, well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And also, I want to get to Boy Meets Minnie's question right now, and I actually want to extend this question to Gila because I know that she will have to type it out, but I think perhaps you would perhaps be able to give a more a fuller answer, right, on this. Boy Meets Minnie says, I don't want to derail, but how is Scheinbaum handling all of this? Because And yeah, there are always opportunists. Exactly, mediocre violists. Um, all the time. They're always opportunists. But this is one which is structural, right? Like without the comprador bourgeoisie there, right? Uh, like this is why you always have like in fact this is why a lot of like libertarians or whatever, right? They will point to the comprador bourgeoisie and see like, look, free market capitalism created these billionaires or whatever, and it's like, yeah, at the expense of everybody else, you know. Um, uh, yeah, they all have a dacha. Yeah, you can think of it as the CIA deciding that flooding the U.S. with drugs to raise money because the government officially getting skeptical about spending money on fighting communism, which followed public opinion. This change allowed for the U.S. to have a new scary enemy they could never beat. Very, very well put. Yeah, it's a villa, essentially. Yeah, it's a second home. Yeah, cottage. Okay, so I'm gonna Boy Meets Mini. I'm gonna tell you what Gila says, and if you would like either one of us to elaborate, again, I still would defer to Gila because she definitely knows a lot more. That Scheinbaum and her people are pretending very hard that they're fighting the cartels now, without ever admitting AMLO was wrong, which is true. Yeah, that is sadly, that is and sending out the Guardia Nacional like to even more places than ever before. Like, um, let's see here. But off topic, how much? But off topic, but how much do these U.S. billion of Costa Rica do U.S. billionaires owe? If I remember correctly, they have land to build their own private cities there, and that's part of why they tend to go there. Yeah, in fact, there were even some. I mean, there were some YouTubers, that have like a lot of subscribers, can live off of that, where like they built two houses, right? They bought a huge plot of land out in the forest because like, oh, I love hiking, so I'm gonna live out in the forest, right? But then the wife was like, but I also want to live close to the beach. So what do? They live on this, right by the beach that has mountains in Costa Rica. They bought this because they earn more money than the average Costa Rican does. So they're able to buy, and because like the laws again are very much made to again be, yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Right. Right. Interesting. Um, but yeah, they do own quite a lot. Money laundering, tax avoidance, islands. Yeah, the like Costa Rica, like also like most. I forget which country. I think it's Panama, but like most ships are registered like Panamanian, because it's like then they don't have to pay any like taxes on them or something like that. And yeah, like just off the coast of Costa Rica, you have what the what are they called? Well, a lot of those tax avoidance places, along with very lax tax code vis-a-vis investors, right? That word is very important in Costa Rica itself. So yeah, it's essentially a place. It's the reason why there's this guy that he calls himself the, what is it called? I forget what he called. But his whole thing is he tries to get people, rich people, like his phrase is like, go where you're treated best. And for him that was Colombia. In fact, I think he even renounced his US citizenship because he didn't want to pay taxes that much. Like he was like, oh, I don't even want that. I want to pay so little tax on everything. So he moved to Colombia, all this stuff, right? But yeah, it's a dacha for the bourgeoisie. Yeah. But also people in the know notice that they're fighting cartel violence in Sonora, not in the other states. It's worse, and other parties are in charge, or other states where AMLO people are in charge, but they can pretend it's not so bad there. One might also notice that the Sonora cartel problem complains that AMLO's people betrayed them with some reason. Yeah, well. So, as Charles Bowden has noted, this book can be read as an instruction manual for understanding the drug cartels. Reporting for the El Paso Herald-Post, Papa embarked on a lengthy investigation into drug trafficking along the border when a fellow photographer was kidnapped for taking pictures of the construction of a hotel in Ciudad Juarez, allegedly owned by a local drug trafficker. Through skillful reporting, Papa managed to receive the control that the Mexican political system exercised over organized crime, subjecting it to its power structure. This control is expressed, for example, in the notion of the plaza. Most reporters in Mexico think that the plaza is the domain of a trafficker. Papa's investigation, following the life of the trafficker Pablo Acosta in the town of Ojinaga, discovered something much more complex. Traffickers like Pablo Acosta operated under a system that was almost like a franchise. They had to pay a monthly fee to their managers for the right to work in a specific area. It was a form of private tax based on sales volume, with money going to those in power. As noted in the book, traffickers frequently receive badges from the federal police. The Army, the Attorney General of Mexico, and its federal police, the Ministry of Interior and its secret police, several governors, and many powerful people were involved. So again, the people who are the traffickers, the people that are just selling in these plazas, at some point, they just give them badges of the federal police, right? Oh, well, we're just patrolling, we're just on patrol, right? La policía siempre en vigilio, right? Papa carried out his research in the late 1980s at the same time that the Mexican political system began a transformation of its security system, and also when the PRI dictatorship was, beginning to almost end. Almost. Transformation of its security system that Walter Morales warned us about. Between 1975 and 1985, between Operation Condor and the assassination of Enrique Camarena, a DEA special agent in Guadalajara, the political system absolutely overpowered organized crime. limited its operations to specific cities, regulated its trafficking routes, and even more importantly, separated it from political, civil, and military power. Not until the open adoption of the U.S. national security discourse of the following decade, especially with the creation of the Center for Information and National Security, or CISEN, in 1989, did the Mexican political system gradually employ a violent militaristic strategy that culminated with the daily horrors of Ciudad Juarez, Monterrey, or Tampico, or Tijuana, and all the crimes against humanity committed during Felipe Calderon's presidency and onward. The supposed national security crisis that Calderon had said justified the war on drugs was based mainly on a discursive strategy without material foundation. So again, the cartel is a discursive strategy. It's them creating the idea of the narco first, then laying it on top of people. The narcos did not exist. Those things did not exist first, and then they gave it a name. They had a name, and then they placed it upon what was there, right? So that's important to keep in mind. The sociologist Fernando Escalante Gonzalo already showed, with a simple analysis based off official figures, that the country's violence began after the militarization ordered by Calderon in 2008. So this is when the drug war started, 2008, right? There was some preamble too, but 2008 is more or less the year that it really started. And it was so horrifying. It was the worst. It was like 2008, 2009, like those first years were horrifying. I had to fly to El Paso to renew my student visa, walked across the bridge before sunrise to Juarez, spent a few days there. Oh, that's nice. Honduras is one of those. Yes, but see, when you say hellish places, right? And I understand that you're not saying that from like from a disparaging point of view, but rather that it's a place that has been made to be that way by way of U.S. imperialism, right? That's the thing. Right, people would not walk thousands of miles and literally leave everything they own behind, their homes, their families, for fun, as much as Fox News likes to say that they knew. So, in the previous decade, between 1997 and 2007, the homicide rate was in fact decreasing in the country's main cities, including Ciudad Juarez. Violence only returned. So again, the violence was going down, and precipitously. It was not going down 2%. Like again, throughout the 90s it had been dropping, but 1997, 2007, it's dropping very quickly. Violence only returned in those areas of the country where Calderon sent thousands of soldiers and federal agents. Calderon and his cabinet wanted to militarize the country to contain a supposed war of cartels that produced no violence. Because some people might be quick to say, but the cartels are violent. The crime rate had been going down. The homicide rate had been going down already. If the government had done nothing, let's say, it would have kept going down. By doing something. Yeah, like over-policing black communities in the U.S., right? Except in this case, they sent in military, right? They sent in military forces, right? And then AMLO created another military force, essentially. His personal Praetorian Guard, essentially. Last Christmas, when I was there, Juarez had a massive collective jailbreak. I mean, honestly, like I don't want to get too deep into it because it's some stuff that's from my research, but also some stuff that's just too horrific to say. But a lot of those jailbreaks are literally of people that are there because of, are not supposed to be there. Yeah. And yeah, exactly, mediocre violist. The only people who do that for fun are rich, usually white people doing eat, pray, love type things. Even then, they have a place to return to once they're done. And in fact, that's how they view it, right? Like, oh, I have to go home. A small diversion. What's AMLO's position on... Uh, okay. Gila, oh, this one I definitely have to hand this one off to you. Small diversion. What is AMLO's placement on the political spectrum? Uh, you know. Again, those of us that live in Mexico, we have a... It's a, I'll let Gila respond. So, again, there was supposedly all of this violence, right? Oh, the cartels, oh, look at this, they're causing this war, so we have to start a war against them. But there was no violence. So how can you justify a non-existent cartel war if there's no violence? He claimed, yeah, AMLO claimed he was a true leftist, but he also never did the things previous actual leftists, including both socialists and Tanky's cosplaying as socialist did. That's true. That's true. Sadly. I mean, and that's, and we can look at the, positive things that he, that happened under his sexenio, right, his administration. But, again, that's, also part of the mix that we have to keep in mind. So, in 2007, a year before Calderon's war began, Luis Astorga published one of his most important books, and this is another book I have to also read. Seguridad, Traficantes y Militares, Security, Traffickers, and the Military. During the first years of the 20th century, national security became the central theme in Mexican drug policy. This is surprising because once again, there was no valid reason to assume that drug traffickers posed a threat to civil society or to the viability of the state. And yet Trump is always saying, oh, the Mexican state is compromised, the cartels have taken it over. No. No. That is not true. 1 year before the quote-unquote joint operations of the military federal police began in the states of Chihuahua, Nuevo León, Guerrero, and Veracruz, which, by the way, Guerrero, since Walsey and you talked about the over-policing of black communities in the U.S., Guerrero has also has the largest area in Mexico that has an Afro-Mexican population, right? So and also a very mixed, diverse population that has in times past represented a legitimate that has represented in the past a revolutionary, that have stood up against the state, right? And we can get into that some other time. But so Astorga wrote, in the field of power, traffickers have historically been subordinate to the government. They have not been in competition with it or have tried to compete by having associations or political parties, nor have they developed a far-reaching infiltration strategy to reverse this subordinate relationship. There is isolated corruption, especially within police departments, but not an agreed-upon plan between criminal organizations or a conspiracy to drive a systemic change that would test the president. In other words, the traffickers are some of the social actors whose activities and actions undoubtedly hinder governance, but do not pose a threat to political power or to the direction of the state. Right? Hello, Powerful Finger. It's so good to see you. Also, cops, military guys are always involved in cartel schemes. I mean, yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And also, hello, Buffy Geek. It's good to see you too. And yes, if you'd like to help out my research, you can always go to my Throne, throne.com/Shakespeare or Shakespeare. and you can help me out there. So, if drug traffickers, as Astorga explains, had neither the long-term capacity nor the political determination to threaten the sovereignty of the state, then what motivated the war on drugs, and where did the violence attributed to the alleged drug cartels come from? I go back to the journalist Ignacio Alvarado to answer this question. Okay. See how much left we have of this. Oh, we're so close. Okay, we'll finish it then. We'll finish it. Violence in Mexico is not explained by a war between drug traffickers or a dispute over plazas. Moreover, there is no single drug trafficker with the capacity to change institutions, such as the Army, the Navy, or the federal police. Not even the recently imprisoned Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Nothing supports the government story. Drugs are only the pretext at the heart of the violence. The U.S. State Department's influence on this issue is crucial. Mexico's judicial, energy, tax, and education reforms are being driven by actors at the highest levels of the United States government, with capital interests in mind. And the Mérida Initiative is the perfect instrument for the social and political manipulation of the country. The goal of this system of terror is exile, the depopulation of immense territories which are rich in hydrocarbons, minerals, and water. Today, we can see how the energy sector has been affected by such reform. Private and foreign capital that have been waiting on this moment for 2 decades can now exploit these natural resources. I'm going to repeat that last part again. The goal of this terror by the state, right, is the depopulation of immense territories that are rich in hydrocarbons, minerals, and water. That is why, right, that is why the image of the narco is supposed to look like, right, the image we're sold is also the image of a rural Mexican. Because those are the people that they are trying to displace. Because otherwise, they can't sell this land to these corporations that have been waiting so patiently for 2 decades, right, to exploit, right, our country, right? So, yes, someone muted? No? Okay. Anybody have anything they would like to add? Anything they'd like to say? Are those who claim legalization of the U.S. would greatly hinder the cartels incorrect because the exploitation? Oh my goodness, thank you so very much. No way, it's about resources? Yeah, somehow it always goes back to capitalism. I wonder why. Thank you so much, Philippe, for the 100 bits. Speaking of resources, Helium, lithium, and or mining episode when? Hey, you know what? I would love to have Helium on. I would welcome it any day. Yes, the exploitation goes much deeper because, again, who ends up benefiting when it does become legalized? It's not the communities that have largely been arrested for possession charges, right? Because who has the money to begin those dispensaries right away? Which groups of people? They say everyone has an equal opportunity, right? As former, I don't even know what to even call them. Former I just call him an evangelical Jew, but Ben Shapiro, right? And people know my whole thing with the Shapiro family. My family hates his family with good reason, and I'm not gonna go into it. But he says, we have equality of opportunity. Do people have equality of opportunity when you have legalization? No. Why? Because, again, who can put up the money to begin the dispensaries? Is it going to be the people that have been arrested? Is it the people that have been demonized by the usage of said drugs? No. It's going to be the people who were always able to use it, get slaps on the wrist, if anything. and have significant capital to invest and then make money off of those people, right? So that's why it's like it can't just be that, right? One of the things too is that there has to be like there are many different things, right? But there has to be like decriminalization, right? A complete evacuation of all former charges to the point where it does not show up as if they had ever been charged with anything, because unfortunately a lot of the states will be like, well, we'll let you go, but we're still going to say it on your record that you were here, when they know that that is a hindrance for people going into the workforce, right? So the important investigative work of the Italian journalist Federico Mastrogiovanni, who actually now lives in Mexico. He actually wrote a really good book, but it's not translated into English. If I might contact him and ask him if I can translate it into English. I mean, I would be totally down. I have done translation before, academic translations, but yeah. AMLO himself built his misogyny fortress in Chiapas. Oh my god. It's funny because I like hearing that does remind me how so many people have called it the his su castillo de, his su ay ahora el hacendado y todo, I skipped one message. Oh, those in the know have noticed that the southern state of Chiapas, while numbers vary depending on who you ask, many thousands have been internally displaced because of cartel violence. Oh yeah, 100,000%. This is the reason why people where I live in Mexico City have continued to be marching against state violence, because even they know it's the state. They know it's the state. It's just a pretense, right? In the same way that like Tren de Aragua and all of that other stuff is just a pretense to, illegally expel U.S. citizens and others, right, from the country, right? People that they don't want, like it's the same thing. And Chiapas, and I actually remember too, because at one point they were saying, oh, there's too much cartel violence, which is why AMLO couldn't like retire. I remember that because that was like back in February. I just remember like, oh, I turn on like Milenio, like Noticias Milenio, and then they're talking about it. But yeah, that like, oh, it's too dangerous for him to go there. And I'm like, because of cartel violence, right? That's what they're saying. And it's like, that's why he has to be in Mexico City, right? Sticking his finger into every pie, right? But yes, he spent over $100 million on over 10 federal buildings for his future protection, including an actual new military base that did not protect people in the routes where the cartels are having turf wars. Yeah, like, it's such a, like, one, I don't know, like, signing all of those agreements, too, to, like, allow the United States to, like, do all of this training and stuff in Campeche and all that stuff. It's just ridiculous. As well as the Canadian academic and journalist Don Paley, have separately come to the same conclusion. The federal government's energy reform, and in fact, this actually was an early article that I published when I was still publishing on Medium before I moved over to Patreon. Well, I actually wrote about this when I was in Mexico, is one of the central explanations for the current violence in Mexico. Mastrogiovanni writes, quote, both processes, the gradual opening of the energy sector to private capital and the intensification of violence and terror, have developed in parallel. Right? Because what does this mean? It involves, one, the displacement of people, right, where they are going to build all of their things, right, but also where they're going to have their power plants, all these stuff, right? So there are people that are going to lose the land that they've had in their family for God only knows how long, right? since time immemorial, right? And instead be driven off of it so that way we can have private, you know, capital into the energy sector, which, again, we nationalized our petroleum industry. But people keep trying to privatize it for some reason because they keep thinking, oh, well, you know, we're not modernizing it enough. Well, you could just choose to modernize it, you know. Let's see here. Oh yeah, the people. Capitalism is to blame it once again. This is my shocked face, right? Exactly. That's a type of hate I support. Yeah, evangelical Jew got him. No, I mean he is. I've been saying that for years now. He's an evangelical Jew. Like it's like someone once brought this up. I think it was you, Boy Meets Minnie. It might have been you, but actually it might. I don't know. But essentially, like, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was someone else. I don't know. But essentially saying that like Vivek Ramaswamy would never convert to any other religion, right? He would never become a Christian because then he would lose his caste status as a Brahmin, right? Like he benefits from the dividends of the caste system too much to become an evangelical Christian. In the same way that Ben Shapiro benefits too much from the apartheid system of the state of Israel that the United States backs, right? For him to, right? Because then he won't be, our Jewish ally, right? Our pro-Israel Jewish ally that also has libertarian takes, right? Then he's just some guy, right? He loses, right? But he still acts like an evangelical to the point where he actively contradicts rabbinic law, like Jewish law. He literally says stuff that is against the Torah, like, you know what I mean? So why are the Shapiros so bad? You have Ben and the guy who was stealing enriched uranium for the U.S. government of the nuclear program. Oh yeah, I know. Ugh. The Kleins and the Shapiros of LA, no, I'm not going to visit any of their houses. I don't want to go there. I don't care. Tren de Aragua is not even a real gang. They're like a prison cell gang. Like, yeah, like they did not exist in any real way, because if they did in Venezuela, that is, right? Because if they did, they're so small that literally every other gang could just defeat them, could just beat them up, because they're such a small group that to even call them that is a bit, you know. I'm trying to have on 3 people. I'm trying to pursue them to appear on a stream. Hey, you know, like if you can help me with the logistics of that, I would appreciate it. My stream froze as soon as you said stick his finger in every. Oh my gosh. Vivek. Arun found a clip of him speaking Tamil, and he says he speaks like a Brahmin too. They make the language super uppity and harsh. You know, I'm not surprised, right? Because apparently when I speak Tamil, I speak it like a mainlander. I don't, you know, or whatever, like, you know, I don't speak Ilam Tamil. I speak, you know, from Tamil Nadu. Apparently, with the very little Tamil that I do know. I still, and it just, you speak Malayaga Tamil? Okay, hey, I'm willing to, hey, I love learning languages. I don't mind learning different dialects of them too. That's awesome to me. The U.S. government would have used to kill Maduro if they were. I mean, yeah, for sure. They're our greatest friends, the Tren de Aragua. You know, lovers of democracy. You know. This is purely speculation, but I've always found interesting that Ben Shapiro obviously wears a black yarmulke that blends with his hair. He wants to be visible. Well, yeah, and not only that, but it's like he doesn't dress like typically how Orthodox Jewish people dress, right? Because there's a movement in the United States called modern Orthodoxy. But even then, he's like, you know, like even then he's way too, you know. From what I've heard, Ilam Tamil is more Sanskritized and more poetic. Oh, so I don't speak the more poetic one? Oh, well. No, I'm just joking. Al Jolani and a vicious young man. He's our friend. He loves democracy. You know, um, this will probably come up later, and not to defend him, but one of the reasons why Rafael El Caro Quintero may not end up getting the death penalty is because he could testify during the interrogation of DEA agent Camarena. That the Mexican Secretary of State and Oliver North for the CIA wanted to know what Camarena had told the DEA and about the CIA training Nicaraguan Contras in the same place where Quintero's people were transporting drugs, which is kind of surprising for another reason. According to the Mexican justice system, Quintero already did his time for Camarena's crime, right? Yeah. But, you know, we voted, you know, Mexico voted for its judges. It loves democracy. Loves democracy. I'm joking, obviously, but, you know, still. Paley views anti-drug policy in the United States and Mexico as a direct expression of capitalism in the neoliberal era, benefiting the global energy sector and expanding economic opportunities in the manufacturing and transportation industries, from mining and hydrocarbon exploitation to the opening up of new Walmart locations. Isn't that wonderful? You get to watch Donald Trump declare, do proxy wars all over the world, including in a neutral country like Mexico, so that way you can have more Walmart locations. That is the truest gift. That is the true foundation of America. Right, he's dressing to signal he's one of the good ones. I know so many people that have said about Al-Jolani that, like, oh, he needs to shave his beard, right? Like, oh, oh, he looks too... And it's just like, well, there are, like, have you ever seen dudes, like, literally, like, in the Midwest, they have, like, huge-ass beards. Like, they literally, like, there are guys that, like, don't even shave, like, their cheek lines. Like, they just have it all... And I'm like, he actually has it, like, nice and styled. It looks like he actually takes care of it. Right? I mean, if he wants to have a beard, go right ahead. Like, anybody can have a beard. MBs, women, men, like, it's beards for everybody. If they want it, like, if they can, why not? Well, it's because they keep trying to say, like, oh, they wanted to make him look more Western. But that means to them, like, being... clean shaven, right? Because it's like, oh, well, how can we trust you if you have a beard? Well, then what about JD Vance then? How are we supposed to trust him then? Or Elon Musk, whenever he grows like just like one weird little patch that just grows out like this. I don't know. It's kind of, I don't know what that man has done to, por el Walmart, exactamente, es para el Walmart, para que finalmente podemos expandir y tener muchos sucursales en Argentina, en todos lugares. There are already Walmarts operating there. No, they want more. See, the thing is that the problem is that there are not enough Walmarts, right? What Walmart wants to do is buy out every single small grocer and just replace it with themselves. Jelani is giving Brooklyn. I mean, look, like, again, like I said, like, hey, beards, if you want to grow one, and and he takes care of his, hey, great. But don't tell him, like, looking Western means being clean shaven. That just sounds very, I don't know. You remember that when Walmart is done with a location and it can't sustain a Walmart anymore, they just leave, having bankrupted all the mom and pop stores, as people in the... Yeah, no, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, that's what they want to do, but they want to do that, worldwide. So, Paley writes, the war on drugs is a long-term fix to capitalism's woes. There is no ethical beer maintenance except Wait. Okay. Combining terror with policymaking in a seasoned neoliberal mix. Ooh. It's like, think of it like a dry rub, right? For, like, a barbecue, right? Like, on some, like, spare ribs, right? Like, that's what this is, right? The seasoned neoliberal mix, right? cracking open social worlds and territories once unavailable to global capitalism, right? Getting that seasoning in, right? This project is about rethinking what is called the war on drugs. It isn't about prohibition or drug policy. Instead, it looks at how in this war, in this info war against the globalists, terror is used against the population in cities and rural areas, and how parallel to this terror and resulting panic, policies that facilitate foreign direct investment and economic growth are implemented. This is drug war capitalism. The last thing I want on my kebab is neoliberal seasoning. Yeah. I'm just like thinking of it like, oh, you know, you're like, you know, it's like, I have my own recipe, and it does not have drug war capitalism. Thank you very much. Oh, look, someone important is coming up. Without crossing paths, okay, Alvarado, Paley, and Mastro Giovanni embarked on research that led them to the same conclusion. The war on drugs is a cipher that masks the political strategy of large-scale community displacement for the appropriation and exploitation of natural resources that, if not for the war on drugs, would remain unattainable for national and transnational capital. There it is in one sentence. In one of his columns, the prominent author Juan Villoro analyzed they count for Walmart when they decide to leave a location. Yeah, that's true. Like, I don't know, to me neoliberal seasoning sounds nasty. Like, I don't know, like I feel like they're like, oh, you know, put some brown, like I feel like they're like, you know, put some, I don't even know, put some weird stuff. Put some marshmallow fluff. I don't know. Anyway, between Mexico and the United States caused by the unexpected election of Donald Trump, when discussing the infamous border wall proposed by Trump, Villoro recalls an episode from The Sopranos. As it is known, the protagonist, Tony Soprano, is a New Jersey gangster that faces the challenges of everyday life in U.S. society while engaging in violent illegal activities. In the episode discussed, Tony Soprano's neighbors cannot hide the fear brought on by their coexistence with a criminal. Everybody is a criminal, in New Jersey, of course. Villoro writes, to satisfy his neighbor's morbid curiosity, Tony Soprano wraps a package full of sand and asks his neighbors to keep it for a while, as if they're his accomplice. They cannot refuse. They accept the box, thinking it contains something illegal, not just sand. In a simple gesture, Tony asserts his power over them while injecting poison into their lives. The narco in Mexico and the United States works like Tony Soprano's clever trick. The narco appears in our society as a fearsome Pandora's box. When I read fearsome Pandora's box, it makes me think of like those grimoires, right, in certain video games where they're like, you know, they're trying to like go after you. That we believe would unleash endless death and destruction if opened. If we could overcome the fear and confront what we call the narco by finally opening the box, we would not find a violent trafficker, but the official language that invents him. We would hear the words that slip through our fingers like sand. Let's open the box then. So, who here wants to open the box first? Neoliberal seasoning sounds like excessive black pepper that hurts your mouth but adds no flavor. It sounds like, you know, like, I forget which John Candy movie it's from, But there's one where he like says like, I think about Pandora's ugly charm bracelets. Oh my god. No, but what I think though is that um when it comes to like the seasoning, I think of that John Candy. I forget which one it is, but he says, "Why does the whole room smell like garlic powder?" Right, and that's essentially what comes to mind. It's just um, another reminder before you finish. AMLO started promising he would tell us what happened to the desaparecidos around 2014, right? I think you mean 14, or do you mean 2004? When he was I get it. I remember. Yeah, 2004. No, you're right. When he was getting ready to backstab Cárdenas and the entire left so he could run for president in 2006. The last active politician who knows where they are became part of his inner circle in 2018. He still hasn't told us what happened to the first 30,000 plus who went missing between 1965 and 1990. So again, this was during the particular height, towards of Mexico's dictatorship, right? Because that's a lot of people. So it's crazy how the Porfiriato outselling its resources to the U.S. never ended. I mean, but the thing is we have to understand, right, is that this is what many countries right? Mexico is just the example that we have that's right here, right, so to speak, right? And the one that's used in a way that shows how little they care about the lives of the people that live here, right? Like, again, hydrocarbons, minerals, water, that's what they care. That they care about exploiting those over human lives, right? To the point where they're willing to cleanse the land of the people that live there, so that then they may exploit said things, right? No. Okay, but garlic powder makes things yummy. True, that is true. Garlic powder is good. Okay, so it's also hard to talk in the same conversation about cartel violence and desaparecidos along with, what do you mean our currency devalued 50% overnight? No, that's true. That's true. Okay, so first of all, I would like to just say to everybody that's joining us, on Twitch and everywhere else, right, that on YouTube, right, that thank you so much for joining us, right? I hope that you guys enjoyed the reading. Again, it's can be a bit of I try my best to try to make sure that I can answer everybody's questions and everything. So I definitely will. Yes, I am gonna raid someone. Who should I raid? Yes, and don't worry, people on Discord. I just want to find out who to raid really quickly. Okay. Let's go with. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much on Twitch. For everybody, could please get in the machine and head over to Zach and make sure to tell him hello from me. And I will see you all next time. Thank you so much. And yes, the people do demand a Gila Shakespeare crossover. Yes. Okay, and for those on YouTube, Again, I will leave it to you as well to go find somewhere to go because I can't raid yet until I hit a certain